Hello and welcome to this week's Com 111. This week we're going to be looking at and starting at books and the power of print. So as you can see here, we start with papyrus in 2400 BCE. People started, after they've been writing on cave walls for a few thousand years, they realized that they need something a little bit more, not durable, but a little lighter and a little easier to carry and transport, so we have papyrus. And then eventually we go to parchment, which is treated animal skin, which replaced papyrus. And then fast forward into the future a bit, we go to manuscripts. Now, manuscripts, going back to the medieval church, were handwritten. So each book was individually written, usually by monks. And these were often called illuminated manuscripts because the monks would draw pictures and calligraphy and all kinds of things into the books. And as it says here, the book was a reverential artifact, meaning, people uh, looked at it almost as well, it was a religious item, but cared about it in that same way. The problem with that is that when you have people handwriting you individual books, is they tend to be very expensive. And then in 1000 CE, the Chinese invent block printing and movable type. Like it says here, the radical process that was not developed in Europe until the 1400s. Because for a long time, people felt that the block printing was created in the 1400s, but in reality, the Chinese had invented it much earlier. So, like I said previously, people often thought when they looked at the printing press that Johannes Gutenberg had invented it first in 1453, when in actuality the Chinese had invented it earlier. But Gutenberg's version of the printing press became the one that really changed print and changed books and changed the world. Because what the printing press did, the most important thing was, is it facilitated quick copies to be made of books and made books a lot more affordable. So here's a picture of the printing press as Gutenberg noted it. What you can notice here is that the printing press was originally designed like a wine press. It looks like a wine press, it kind of works like a wine press, but this was the most popular and most useful version that Gutenberg was able to put out. So like I said earlier, because the printing press was able to print multiple books fairly quickly, it leads to the development of popular literature. People are able not just to get religious books, but all kinds of different books. Now, the first book that was brought to the United States was something called the Bay Psalm Book in 1640. And the first work of fiction in the United States was a book called Pamela was brought here in 1744 by Benjamin Franklin. So a long time after we have the printing press with Johannes Gutenberg, it still takes a long time for books to reach the general public. What you have in the 17 and late 1800s is the penny press, the dime press, but most notably pulp. Um, so as you see here, dime novels and pulp fiction. Obviously, this one I'm showing you here is a pretty wild representation, but these books were what was popular with the general public. Uh, Books about sex, murder, crime, violence, all of these books, pulp books, were the ones that were most often bought. Now, what's interesting about there's several things that are interesting about that. Now, the reason why they were called pulp books is that they were made out of the cheapest wood possible. All right, the wood that was, a wood that was so cheap to turn into paper that it would yellow, which is another reason why these books were called yellow press or yellow books, because they would eventually over time just kind of fall apart and turn yellow. A lot of these books are very collectible now, but just keep in mind, like I said, even up until the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, pulp books, yellow books, crime books were the most popular books sold outside of the Bible, ironically. So once they start making all these books, we start getting major, like it says, early prestigious publishing houses which were the foundation of the modern book industry. Companies like Random House, Penguin, uh, they still survive now as part of bigger conglomerates. So the oldest book companies have been around now literally for hundreds of years and continue to publish books. Very few companies are actually in charge of publishing the books that we read today. Now, the value of books, I mean, books educated people, and as you can see here, the book industry helped to assimilate European immigrants into the American culture and language, which is saying is that early on in American history, well, not early in American history, but the 1700s, 1800s, all the way into the 1900s, individual communities had newspapers that reflected their own culture and language. And a lot of these newspapers, for instance, O Jornal in Fall River, publishes in English and in Portuguese in the same book. So a lot of these newspapers were used for immigrants to learn the culture, learn the language, and assimilate. So there was a decline in book selling from 1910 to the 1950s. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the Great Depression. But what's interesting is after World War II, as you can see in the picture here, this GI reading a copy of Tarzan. During World War II, a lot of GIs, when they were overseas, read comic books, read newspapers, read books. And when they came back to the United States, they wanted to continue to read. And because of the Montgomery GI Bill, a lot of them also went to college. And because of that, more people who go to college tend to read a lot more. So after World War II, it bounced back, and mostly comics and pulp fiction. Interesting what happened to comics. Early comics, like you see here, were not superhero based. Other than Superman, Batman, and Captain America, most popular early comics were crime, horror, and western. So here's a chart just sort of showing you how uh, book revenue was split up in 2010, which companies or which, excuse me, types of books sold more. You can see here that adult books are 8.1 billion, and college is second with 4.5 billion dollars. So it goes to show you how important your college textbook dollar is. So this is to show you how your college textbook dollar is actually broken down. 77.4% is the wholesale cost. 10.7 cents is the college store personnel. 3.7 cents is the college store income. 7.2 cents is the college store operation. And 1 cent is the freight expense of all this. Now, you can see here why ebooks are popular or becoming more popular, because for a publishing company, if they send you an ebook online, they're eliminating about 40% of the cost of a textbook. So in the last few years, we've seen a lot of influences on the book industry through television and film. Most notably, the Oprah Winfrey Book Club, which has sold an enormous amount of books and been enormously successful. A lot of that has to do with Oprah's target audience. Middle-aged women, middle-aged working women, tend to read more than any other aspect of the culture. So Oprah had the actual perfect demographic to sell books to, and it shows. On the bottom here, you can see J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books developed into a huge successful film industry, and the Harry Potter books are now part of a thing that's called YA, young adult books. And young adult books have become enormously popular in the last 20 years and have sold millions of copies, and whether it be Harry Potter or Twilight or The Hunger Games, almost all of these really popular young adult books have been translated into film. So this takes us to the modern book, which is the digital book, all right, and the concept of convergence. Convergence is all of our devices, media devices, kind of blending into one. Because when you look at a tablet, you got to realize it's a television, it's a video game system, it's a book, it's a million different things. So convergence is all of those things kind of melding together. All right. So as it says here, ebooks, the Kindle Fire and Kindle Amazon successful digital reader. Apple has the iPad and Barnes & Noble has the Nook. In 2011, ebooks account for 11% of all books sold. The number could increase by half in 2015, which it has. Ebooks have the power or potential to reimagine what a book could be, because ebooks can have links in them, they can have video in them, they can have all kinds of different things. An ebook is sort of a modern illuminated book, but we're still in a sort of a crossroads. I know some of you look at this and scoff because you say, I love real books and I don't want ebooks. But one bit of news I have to remind you of is publishers, book companies want to sell ebooks because ebooks eliminates a lot of costs for publishers. So I think the transition from real books to ebooks, or physical books to ebooks, will not just be spearheaded by the public, but by the publishing houses themselves, because it is a much more lucrative, much easier process for them to sell. So let's talk a little bit about censorship and banned books. The American Library Association compiles a list of the most challenged books every year. As it says here, a book challenge is a formal complaint to have a book removed from a public or school library. So what are these books, and what type of books get challenged? What type of books get taken off the shelves? What type of books get burned? All right. So what you see in the background here is a copy of Crime Suspense Stories. In the late 1950s, early 1960s, comic books were attacked for being too violent and causing young men to be more violent and hysterical. And we'll talk more about that later on. So here's Dr. Frederick Wertham in the Comics Code. So Dr. Frederick Wertham wrote a book in the late 1950s talking about the violence of comic books. So what happened to the comic book industry is they decided to self-police themselves. So on the left-hand side here, you see a little sign that says approved by the Comics Code Authority. The Comics Code Authority was not a federal body. The Comics Code Authority was created so that the federal government would not regulate comics. And basically what the Comics Code Authority is the comic book companies said that their books, anything that had this seal, would not be too violent, would not be too sexual, would not do anything too crazy. Now, interestingly enough, this kind of caused superheroes to become the predominant characters in comic books, because comic book companies did not want to show real people doing acts of violence. So they went back and fell back on superheroes to kind of fill up and sell comics. That's why in the 1960s, Marvel Comics and then eventually DC Comics come in and they revitalize comic books and change the concept of comic books forever. So as it says here, the common reasons for challenges include sexually explicit passages, offensive language, occult themes, racism, violence, and homosexual themes. Any one of these things, or all of these things, could get your book or comic book banned or put on a list. Now, one positive thing about the internet, because I know you heard a lot of negative things about the internet, is that it's facilitated that ability for banned books to go into countries where print versions are outlawed, most notably China. China has always been notorious about censorship and banning books, and now with the internet, people are able to get books they would not be able to read otherwise. So here's a list of the top 20 banned classics, and I want you to really look at this, because what is amazing about this list is that if you look at the list, it's more or less your high school summer reading list. I mean, you have The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, Grapes of Wrath, Kill a Mockingbird. These are all books that most of us had to read in our high school, college English courses. And because people wanted to read them for those courses, These are the books that parents singled out as the most offensive. I mean, when you look down, you see something like Charlotte's Web at number 13. I mean, Charlotte's Web is known for being a children's book and a very popular children's book, and yet it's on this list of banned books. I mean, a lot of these things are something that could be very familiar to you and probably shock you, okay? As you see here, the number one thing to get banned is sexually explicit material. Number two, offensive language. Number three, unsuited for an age group. Number four, violence. Five, homosexuality. Six, religious viewpoints. And seven, anti-family. So think about that. So getting back to who owns these things, okay? So like most mass media, commercial publishing is dominated by a handful of major corporations with ties to international media conglomerates, right? Consolidation of the book industry raises concerns including financial struggle of independent booksellers and publishers. So like anything else, if you're a small publisher or a small distributor in the United States or around the world, you're more or less going to get crushed by these big companies, which causes a big problem for people to publish things themselves. Now, what's interesting is that by using Amazon and things like Exlibris, a lot of people are self-publishing books and now actually have a distribution system put in, and that's another positive thing about the internet and digital media. So here's a breakdown of the major companies. As you can see, there's five of them here. Not a lot of companies. Lagardère, Random House, Penguin, HarperCollins, and Simon and Schuster. So whatever book you pick up, more than likely one of these companies are the publishing companies for any one of the books that you have. So how do these companies work? Well, number one, you have the acquisitions editor. The acquisitions editor's job is to recruit. They go out and they find new talent and new people, new writers to come in, and they handle the rights to those writers, which books they buy, which books they have the rights to. Then you have the developmental editor that handles feedback to the author and coordinates outside judges of the work. Developmental editor is the person who decides if your book is good for the mass market, what people want to buy, if your book needs certain elements to make it more sellable or viable. Then you have your copy editors. Your copy editors are basically your English teachers. They're the people who are going to go after you as far as grammar, syntax, all kinds of errors, all the above. If your book is too long or too short. Like I said, basically they're your English teachers. And then your design managers take care of the layout and your cover design to make sure that your book looks pretty and looks appealing to people who want to buy it. So here's the breakdown of the money brought in for an ebook versus a regular book. So as you see here, a hardcover is about $26 in the bookstore versus the ebook, which is $12.99. So right away, the ebook looks like a massive savings for the buyer. But not only is it a massive savings for the buyer, it's a massive savings for the publishing company. Because if you look at the chunk, the bookseller, the bookstore, takes about half of the money for an actual physical hardcover, where if you look on the right-hand side, the online venue takes maybe not even, probably about a third of the money. And if you look at the publisher's take of the book, it's considerably larger for that ebook. So, I mean, when you factor in the bookstore and the bookstore returns, okay, a huge portion. Well, factor in the bookstore returns, and printing and shipping. All of that money goes into the book publishing company's pocket on the right-hand side for an ebook. So once again, that is why there will be more emphasis on selling ebooks than physical books, because the profit margin for the book companies is enormous for ebooks and actually very small for physical books. Now, the effect of this, you see bookstores, independents versus chains. Chains like Barnes and Noble, Borders, which no longer exists, are disappearing because of the ebook sales. Now, independent bookstores are only 8% of the market share in 2010 and even less now. All right. Whereas Amazon, which is the leader of online sales, and BarnesandNoble.com are both doing extremely well and flourishing. All right. Now, book clubs and mail order has also really, really dissipated. All right, because now that people can just once again get ebooks, a lot of this stuff is going away. Now, bookstores, when you refer to a physical bookstore, the terminology used for any physical place is brick and mortar. So what we're seeing is really getting away from the usage of brick and mortar stores and replacing them with all these e-online stores. And this chart here is just to show you right now the leaders in the house when it comes to e-online purchases. Amazon is about 40%, Apple iBooks is 29, so 29 roughly 30%. Nook is 12%, and other ebook stores online is about 19%. So you can see the foothold that both Amazon and Apple has in the electronic book market. So last but not least, some good news when it comes to books. Uh, when you look at literature, as it says here from Uncle Tom's Cabin in Silent Spring, it's always had a positive influence in social change in America, which is just it's just a showing historically depicting the importance of books. Um, Now, starting in 2009, we're seeing that Americans are reading more again because going online is easy and getting books is easier. uh, More people are reading. And when you think about it, you might not even consider yourself a reader, but here you are reading this, and you're probably going to read quite a bit of stuff online today. Now, you're not sitting down and reading a novel, but you are actually reading. And because of that, you just become more literate, your vocabulary grows, and it just has an overall effect in the business and industry, right? As it says here, increasingly the book industry is promoting new ideas and authors while trying to maintain commercial viability, and that's really the key. The book industry, like any other industry, any industry that makes money, they're always trying to find a new way or a better way to sell their products, to reach out more people, to connect with more people, and become more viable. So that's why books are here. They will continue to be here to stay and continue to be popular going forward into the future.